The diesel engine rumbled beneath Frank Morrison as he guided his Kenworth W900 through the pre-dawn darkness of Interstate 70, somewhere between Kansas City and Denver. The dashboard clock read 4:47 a.m., and the only light came from the green glow of his instruments and the occasional flash of headlights from passing vehicles. At 58 years old, Frank had been driving these roads for 34 years, and he knew every curve, every rest stop, every mile marker like the lines on his own weathered hands. His face was set in the same hard expression it had worn for the past 3 years, ever since the accident that had taken everything from him. The other truckers at the stops called him Stone Face Morrison, a nickname he had earned through thousands of miles of silence and a demeanor that discouraged conversation. He never smiled. He barely spoke. He hauled his loads from coast to coast like a ghost, present in body but absent in spirit. The CB radio crackled with chatter from other drivers, but Frank kept his turned low. He had nothing to say to them, and he did not want to hear their complaints about traffic or weather or the price of fuel. His world had shrunk to the dimensions of his cab, to the endless ribbon of highway that stretched before him, to the numbing routine of driving and sleeping and driving again. His destination was a distribution center outside Denver, where he would drop off a load of auto parts and pick up another shipment bound for Portland. It was the same work he had done for decades, the same motions repeated until they required no thought at all. That was how he preferred it. Thinking led to remembering, and remembering led to pain. The sun began to rise as he crossed into Colorado, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and orange that he barely noticed. Once, he would have pulled over to watch the sunrise, would have called his wife Sarah on the phone to describe the colors, would have taken a photograph to show his daughter Lily when he got home. But Sarah and Lily were gone now, buried in a cemetery in Ohio that he could not bring himself to visit, and sunrises had become just another part of the landscape sliding past his window. He pulled into a truck stop outside Lyman for fuel and coffee, his joints protesting as he climbed down from the cab. The morning air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant mountains. Frank stretched his back, feeling the familiar ache that had become his constant companion, then walked toward the building with his head down and his shoulders hunched. Inside, the truck stop was busy with the morning rush, truckers and travelers grabbing breakfast and caffeine before continuing their journeys. Frank moved through them like a shadow, invisible and unremarkable, ordering his coffee black and refusing the waitress's attempts at small talk. He was heading back to his truck when he heard the crying. It was a child's cry, high and frightened, coming from somewhere near the back of the parking lot. Frank hesitated, his instinct to mind his own business warring with something deeper, some remnant of the man he used to be. The crying continued, punctuated by hiccuping sobs that seemed to grow more desperate by the second. Frank cursed under his breath and changed direction, walking toward the sound. He found her behind a row of parked trucks, a tiny girl with tangled brown hair and a dirty pink dress, sitting on the cracked asphalt with her knees pulled up to her chest. She could not have been more than 5 years old, and she was utterly alone. "Hey," Frank said, his voice rough from disuse. "Hey, kid, what's wrong?" The girl looked up at him with tear-streaked cheeks and enormous brown eyes that seemed too large for her small face. Her lower lip trembled as she studied him, clearly uncertain whether to be afraid or relieved. "I can't find my mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She told me to stay in the car, but I had to go potty, and when I came back, the car was gone." Frank felt something twist in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced in years. He crouched down, bringing himself closer to her level, his knees cracking in protest. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. The girl shrugged, a gesture that seemed heartbreakingly adult. "I don't know. A long time." The sun came up. Frank looked around, searching for anyone who might be looking for a lost child. The parking lot was full of activity, but no one seemed to be searching. No one seemed to have noticed the tiny girl crying behind the trucks. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma," she said. "Emma Rose Patterson." I'm 5 years old. I know my address and my phone number. My mommy taught me. That's good, Frank said. That's real good, Emma. Can you tell me your phone number? Emma recited it carefully, and Frank pulled out his phone and dialed. The call went straight to voicemail, a generic message that gave no indication of who it belonged to. She's not answering, Frank said, more to himself than to Emma. We need to tell someone inside, get them to call the police. No! Emma's eyes went wide with fear. No police. Mummy said never talk to police. She said they would take me away. Frank felt his stomach drop. There was a story here, one he was not sure he wanted to know. But looking at this terrified little girl, alone and abandoned in a truck stop parking lot, he knew he could not simply walk away. Okay, he said slowly, no police yet, but we need to find your mummy. Do you know where she was going? Emma shook her head. She said we were going to start over. She said things would be better in California. Frank nodded, his mind racing. A mother and daughter, heading west, running from something. It was a story as old as the highway itself. Are you hungry? He asked. Emma nodded, her eyes filling with fresh tears. Mummy said she would get me breakfast, but then she left. Come on, Frank said, straightening up and offering his hand. Let's get you something to eat. Then we'll figure out what to do. Emma hesitated, looking at his outstretched hand with obvious uncertainty. My mommy said not to go with strangers. Your mommy's right, Frank said, but I'm not asking you to go anywhere with me. I'm asking you to come inside that building right there, where there are lots of people, and get some food. You can see the building from here. It's safe. Emma considered this, her small face scrunched in concentration. Finally, she reached up and took his hand, her tiny fingers wrapping around his calloused palm. The contact sent a jolt through Frank, a flash of memory so vivid it nearly brought him to his knees. Lily, at 5 years old, reaching for his hand as they walked through the county fair, the sticky sweetness of cotton candy on her fingers, her laughter as he lifted her onto his shoulders to see the fireworks. He pushed the memory away, focusing on the present, on the child who needed his help right now. They walked into the truck stop together, Emma's hand still clasped in his. The waitress who had tried to make small talk earlier looked up with surprise, her eyes widening at the sight of Stoneface Morrison holding hands with a tiny girl. Well, who's this? She asked, her voice warm and curious. This is Emma, Frank said. She got separated from her mother. We need to figure out how to find her. The waitress, whose name tag read Dolores, immediately shifted into action. She came around the counter and crouched down to Emma's level, her face soft with concern. Hi there, sweetheart. I'm Dolores. Are you hungry? Emma nodded shyly, pressing closer to Frank's leg. Let's get you set up in a booth, and I'll bring you some pancakes. How does that sound? Emma looked up at Frank as if seeking permission. He nodded, and she allowed herself to be led to a booth near the window. Frank slid in across from her, feeling awkward and out of place, but unwilling to leave. Dolores brought pancakes and orange juice, and Emma ate with the single-minded focus of a child who had not had a proper meal in too long. Frank watched her, his coffee growing cold in his hands, his mind churning with questions he was not sure he should ask. When did you last see your mommy? He asked finally. Emma paused, a forkful of pancake halfway to her mouth. Last night, she said. She was talking on the phone. She was crying. Then she told me to stay in the car and she would be right back. Frank felt his jaw tighten. A mother who left her 5-year-old alone in a car overnight. A mother who told her child to fear the police. This situation was getting more complicated by the minute. Did your mommy seem upset about something? He asked carefully. Emma nodded, her eyes dropping to her plate. She's always upset, she said quietly, ever since we left Daddy's house. She says Daddy was mean to us, but I don't remember him being mean. I just remember him being sad. Frank took a deep breath, trying to piece together the fragments of this child's story. A family broken apart, a mother running, a father left behind. It was messy and painful and none of his business. But Emma was sitting across from him, syrup on her chin and fear in her eyes, and walking away was not an option. Emma, Frank said slowly, do you know your daddy's phone number? The girl shook her head. Mommy threw away my old phone. She said it was so Daddy couldn't track us. Frank rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the weight of this situation settling onto his shoulders. He was a truck driver, not a social worker. He had no training for this, no skills beyond keeping an 18-wheeler on the road and his own demons at bay. But he had been a father once. He knew what it felt like to love a child more than his own life. And he knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that he could not leave this little girl alone. Dolores returned to check on them, her expression worried. Any luck reaching her mother? Frank shook his head. Phone goes to voicemail. We should call the authorities, Dolores said, lowering her voice. This isn't right. A child this young, left alone all night. No! Emma's cry was sharp and frightened. Please don't. Mommy said they would take me away. She said I would never see her again. Dolores and Frank exchanged glances, both of them recognizing the impossible position they were in. A child who needed help, but was terrified of the people who could provide it. A mother who was either in trouble herself or was the source of trouble. Let me try the phone again, Frank said. Maybe she'll answer this time. He stepped outside and dialed the number Emma had given him. Again, it went to voicemail. He tried 3 more times, leaving a message on the last attempt. This is Frank Morrison. I found your daughter Emma at a truck stop in Lyman, Colorado. She's safe, but she's scared and she needs you. Please call this number as soon as you get this message. He hung up and stared at his phone, willing it to ring. It remained silent. When he went back inside, Emma was drawing on a paper placemat with crayons Dolores had found somewhere. She looked up as he approached, hope flickering in her eyes. Did you find Mommy? Not yet, Frank admitted, but we're going to keep trying. Emma's face fell, but she nodded and returned to her drawing. Frank slid back into the booth, watching her small hand move across the paper. She was drawing a house with a red door, a tree in the yard, and 3 figures standing in front of it. Who's that? Frank asked, pointing to the drawing. That's me, Emma said, indicating the smallest figure. And that's Mommy. And that's Daddy. That's our old house, before we had to leave. It's a nice house, Frank said. I miss it, Emma said simply. I miss my room. I miss my toys. I miss my daddy. Frank felt his heart crack open a little more. This child, so young and so lost, caught in the middle of something she did not understand. He thought of Lily at this age, thought of how he would have moved heaven and earth to protect her from pain, but he had not protected her. He had been on the road when the drunk driver ran a red light, when the impact crushed the driver's side of Sarah's car, when his wife and daughter died together while he was 500 miles away hauling a load of furniture. 3 years later, the guilt still ate at him like acid. He should have been there. He should have been driving. He should have been the one to die. The phone in his pocket buzzed, and Frank nearly dropped it in his haste to answer. Hello? Who is this? The voice on the other end was female, young, and filled with suspicion. Why do you have my daughter? This is Frank Morrison. I'm a truck driver. I found Emma in the parking lot of a truck stop in Lyman. She said you left her in the car last night and didn't come back. There was a long pause, filled with what sounded like stifled crying. I didn't mean to leave her that long, the woman said finally. Something happened. I had to take care of something. I was coming back. Mom, your daughter has been alone all night. She's scared and hungry. Where are you? I'm in Denver. There was a problem with my car. I had to get it fixed. I was going to come back for her as soon as I could. Frank's jaw tightened. Denver was nearly 2 hours away. This woman had left her 5-year-old alone for an entire night in a parking lot while she drove to Denver. You need to come get your daughter, he said, keeping his voice level with effort. Right now. I know. I'm leaving now. I'll be there in a couple hours. Just please don't call the police. Please. They'll take her away from me. Frank looked at Emma, who was watching him with wide, anxious eyes. She had heard enough to know the conversation was about her. I'm not going to call the police, Frank said slowly. But you need to get here. Today. Your daughter needs you. Thank you, the woman breathed. Thank you so much. I'll be there. I promise." The line went dead, and Frank lowered the phone, feeling the weight of a promise he was not sure the woman would keep. "Was that Mommy?" Emma asked, her voice trembling with hope. "Yeah, sweetheart. That was your mommy. She's coming to get you. She'll be here in a couple hours." Emma's face lit up with a smile that transformed her entire being. She scrambled out of the booth and threw her arms around Frank's waist, hugging him with surprising strength for someone so small. "Thank you," she said, her voice muffled against his jacket. "Thank you for helping me find my mommy." Frank stood frozen, his arms hanging awkwardly at his sides. He had not been hugged in 3 years, had not allowed anyone close enough to try. But this tiny girl, this stranger's child, had broken through his defenses without even trying. Slowly, hesitantly, he raised his hands and placed them on her small shoulders. "You're welcome, Emma," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. Dolores appeared with a fresh cup of coffee and a knowing smile. "Looks like someone made a friend," she said. "Her mommy's coming," Emma announced proudly. The nice man found her. Frank felt something strange happening to his face. The muscles around his mouth were twitching, pulling upward in a way they had not done in years. He clamped down on it, forcing his expression back to neutral, but the sensation lingered. "Well," Dolores said, "you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. Plenty of coffee and crayons to go around." Frank nodded his thanks and slid back into the booth. Emma climbed up next to him this time, sitting close enough that her small body pressed against his side. She picked up her crayons and resumed drawing, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Will you draw with me?" she asked, pushing a crayon toward him. Frank stared at the crayon like it was a foreign object. "I'm not much of an artist," he said. "That's okay." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact. "I'll teach you." She handed him a blue crayon and pointed to a blank section of the placemat. "Draw a truck," she instructed. "I saw your truck outside. It's really big." Frank hesitated, then picked up the crayon. His hands, so steady on the wheel of an 18-wheeler, felt clumsy and uncertain as he sketched a rough outline of a truck. It looked more like a box with wheels than anything recognizable. Emma studied his drawing with the serious expression of an art critic. "It's good," she pronounced finally, "but you need to add more wheels. Trucks have lots of wheels." "You're right," Frank admitted, adding more circles to the bottom of his drawing. "How's that?" "Better." Emma nodded approvingly. "Now you need to draw you driving it." Frank's hand stilled on the paper. He had not drawn himself in years, had not even looked at photographs from before the accident. Seeing his own face reminded him too much of what he had lost. "I don't know how to draw people," he said. "I'll help you." Emma took the crayon from his hand and added a simple figure to the driver's seat, a circle for a head and lines for a body. "There, that's you." Frank looked at the crude drawing, at the stick figure behind the wheel of the misshapen truck. It was the most personal piece of art he had possessed in years. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome." Emma beamed up at him. "Now draw where you're going." "Where am I going?" "On your truck, where are you driving to?" Frank considered the question. His destination was a distribution center, a warehouse full of boxes and paperwork, and nothing that mattered. But Emma was looking at him with such expectation, such innocent curiosity, that he found himself wanting to give her a better answer. "The mountains," he said. "I'm driving to the mountains." "I've never seen mountains," Emma said wistfully. "Mommy says they're beautiful." "They are," Frank said, surprising himself with the admission. He had stopped noticing beauty years ago, had stopped seeing anything but the endless grey ribbon of road. But talking to Emma, he could almost remember what it felt like to look at the world with wonder. "Maybe you'll see them someday," he said, "when you get to California with your mommy." Emma's face flickered with something that might have been doubt. "Maybe," she said quietly. They continued drawing together, Emma creating an elaborate scene with houses and trees and animals, while Frank added trucks and roads at her direction. Time passed without his noticing, the clock on the wall ticking away the minutes as they worked. At some point, Emma began to yawn, her small body sagging against his side. "Are you tired?" Frank asked. Emma nodded, rubbing her eyes. I didn't sleep very good last night. The car was cold. Frank felt a surge of anger at the mother who had left this child alone in a cold car, but he pushed it down. Getting angry would not help Emma. You can rest if you want, he said. I'll wake you up when your mommy gets here. You'll stay? Emma's voice was small and uncertain. You won't leave? I'll stay, Frank promised. I'm not going anywhere. Emma curled up on the booth seat, using Frank's jacket as a pillow. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep, her small face peaceful in a way it had not been since he found her. Frank sat motionless, afraid to disturb her. He watched her sleep, this tiny stranger who had somehow cracked open the shell he had built around himself. Her trust was absolute and unearned, given freely simply because he had shown her kindness. He thought about Lily, about how she used to fall asleep on his lap during long road trips. Sarah would be driving, and Frank would hold their daughter, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, marveling at the miracle of her existence. Those memories had been locked away for 3 years, too painful to access, but sitting here with Emma, they surfaced unbidden, not as wounds, but as gifts. Reminders of a time when he had known how to love, how to connect, how to be present. Dolores stopped by the table periodically, refilling his coffee and checking on Emma with maternal concern. She did not ask questions, did not push for information, just offered quiet support that Frank appreciated more than he could say. 2 hours passed, then 3. Frank's phone remained silent, and his unease grew with each passing minute. She should be here by now, he said to Dolores during one of her visits. Dolores nodded, her expression worried. You want me to try calling again? Frank dialed the number himself, but this time it did not even ring. The call went straight to a message saying the number was no longer in service. Something's wrong, he said. Dolores bit her lip. Maybe we should call someone, the police or... Frank looked at Emma, still sleeping peacefully. Her small hand curled around the edge of his jacket. If he called the police, they would take her, put her in the system, separate her from her mother, who was clearly struggling but was still her mother. But if he did not call someone, what then? He could not sit in this truck stop forever, and Emma could not stay here alone. Let me think, he said. He stepped outside, needing air and space to process. The parking lot was quieter now, the morning rush having given way to the midday lull. His truck sat where he had left it, the chrome gleaming in the sun. He had a schedule to keep, a load to deliver, a life that demanded nothing from him except miles. He could hand Emma over to the authorities, get back on the road, and forget this had ever happened. But he knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that he would not do that, could not do that, not after everything. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Frank's heart jumped as he opened it. I'm sorry. I can't come back. Please take care of Emma. Tell her I love her and I'm sorry. She's better off without me. Frank stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure he understood. The mother was not coming. She had abandoned her daughter at a truck stop and disappeared. He felt rage building in his chest, hot and righteous. What kind of mother did this? What kind of person left their child with a stranger and vanished into the wind? But beneath the rage, there was something else. Something that felt almost like recognition. He knew about running away. He knew about believing the people you loved were better off without you. He had felt that way himself, countless times over the past 3 years. He went back inside, his mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. Emma was still asleep, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. She looked so peaceful, so trusting. She had no idea that her world was about to shatter. Dolores saw his expression and came over immediately. What happened? Frank showed her the text message. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh, that poor baby, she whispered. What are we going to do? I don't know, Frank admitted, but I'm not calling the police, not yet. That little girl is terrified of them. Her mother told her they would take her away. But what choice do we have? We can't just... I know. Frank ran his hands through his hair. I know, but there has to be another way. Something that doesn't traumatize her even more than she's already been traumatized. Dolores was quiet for a moment. The message said to take care of her, she said slowly. Maybe you could, just for a little while, until we figure out something better. Frank stared at her. I'm a truck driver. I live in my cab. I can't take care of a 5-year-old. You've been taking care of her all morning, Dolores pointed out, and she trusts you. That has to count for something. Frank looked at Emma, at the small form curled up in the booth, at the drawing of the truck she had helped him make. Taking her with him was insane, impossible. He was not equipped for this, emotionally or practically. But the alternative was handing her over to strangers, watching the fear in her eyes as she was taken away, knowing he had broken the promise he made to stay. I need to make some calls, he said finally. He stepped outside again and dialed a number he had not called in months. It rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered. Frank, is that you? Hey, Nancy, it's me. Nancy Morrison was Frank's younger sister, the only family he had left. She had tried to reach him after the accident, had called and written and even shown up at truck stops trying to find him. He had pushed her away, convinced that his grief would only burden her. Frank, where are you? Are you okay? I've been so worried. I'm fine. Listen, I need your help with something. It's complicated. He told her the whole story, from finding Emma in the parking lot to the text message from her mother. Nancy listened without interrupting, her silence speaking volumes. So, this little girl is just alone? She said when he finished. Her mother just left her? Yeah, and I don't know what to do. If I call the police, they'll put her in foster care. She's terrified of that. But I can't just keep her. I'm a truck driver, Nancy. My home has 18 wheels. Nancy was quiet for a long moment. Bring her to me, she said finally. What? Bring her to me. I'm in Omaha. It's what, 8 hours from where you are? You can drive through the night and be here by morning. I'll take care of her while we figure out what to do. Nancy, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Frank, this little girl needs help, and so do you, even if you won't admit it. Bring her here. Let me help. Frank felt something loosen in his chest, some knot of tension he had not even realized he was carrying. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll bring her. He hung up and went back inside. Emma was still sleeping, but she stirred as he approached, her eyes fluttering open. Is Mommy here? She asked, her voice foggy with sleep. Frank crouched down beside the booth, bringing himself to her eye level. Emma, I need to talk to you about something. Emma's face went pale, her small body tensing. She's not coming, is she? Frank hesitated, then shook his head. She's not coming right now, sweetie, but I talked to my sister. Her name is Nancy, and she lives in a place called Omaha. Would you be okay coming with me to meet her? Emma's eyes filled with tears. Why doesn't Mommy want me anymore? The question hit Frank like a punch to the gut. He reached out and took Emma's small hands in his own. Your mommy loves you, Emma. I know she does. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that make it hard for them to take care of the people they love. It doesn't mean she doesn't want you. It just means she needs help too. Emma sniffled, fat tears rolling down her cheeks. I want my mommy. I know, sweetheart, I know. Frank squeezed her hands gently. But right now, I need you to be brave. Can you do that for me? Emma looked at him, her brown eyes swimming with tears, but also with something else. Trust. Despite everything, this little girl still trusted him. Will you stay with me? She asked. I'll stay with you, Frank promised. I'm not going anywhere. They left the truck stop an hour later after Frank had paid for their meals and thanked Dolores for her help. Emma climbed into the cab of his truck with wide-eyed wonder, marveling at the height of the seat and the complexity of the dashboard. This is even bigger than I thought, she said, her tears temporarily forgotten in the face of new experience. Frank helped her buckle into the passenger seat, adjusting the belt to fit her small frame. It's a pretty big truck, he agreed. Where does it sleep? In the back. Frank pointed to the sleeper berth behind the seats. There's a bed back there. Emma craned her neck to look. Cool, she breathed. They pulled out of the parking lot and onto the highway, heading east toward Omaha. The landscape unfolded around them, vast and open, the Colorado plains giving way to the rolling hills of Kansas. Emma pressed her face against the window, watching the world go by. "Look at the cows," she exclaimed, "and the horses and the—" "What are those?" Frank glanced where she was pointing. "Those are wind turbines. They make electricity from the wind. The wind makes electricity. Yeah. The wind spins those big blades, and that creates power that people use to light their homes and run their computers." Emma considered this. "The wind is really strong," she said. "It is out here," Frank agreed. "Nothing to stop it." They drove in silence for a while, Emma absorbed in the scenery, Frank lost in thought. He had not had a passenger in his truck since before the accident. Sarah and Lily used to ride with him sometimes, during summer breaks when school was out. Lily would sit exactly where Emma was sitting now, asking endless questions about how the truck worked and where they were going. The memory did not hurt as much as he expected. It was bittersweet, yes, tinged with loss, but there was also warmth in it, a reminder of happier times. "Frank," Emma said, breaking the silence, "will your sister like me?" Frank glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Of course she will. Nancy likes everyone. What if she doesn't want me to stay? Then we'll figure something else out." "But I think she'll want you to stay, Emma. Nancy is a good person. She has a big heart." "Like you?" Emma asked. Frank almost laughed, the sound catching in his throat before it could emerge. "I don't know about that," he said. "You have a big heart," Emma insisted. "You found me and you helped me and you're taking me to your sister. That's what people with big hearts do." Frank did not know how to respond to that. He had spent 3 years convinced that his heart was dead, calcified by grief into something hard and useless. But this little girl, with her innocent observations and unconditional trust, was making him question that belief. They stopped for dinner at a truck stop in Salina, Kansas. Emma ordered chicken fingers and fries, and Frank found himself smiling at her enthusiasm as she dipped each fry in ketchup with meticulous care. The smile felt strange on his face, like a muscle he had forgotten how to use, but it also felt good, natural, like something that had been missing was slowly returning. "You're smiling," Emma observed, pointing at him with a fry. Frank's hand went to his face, as if to confirm her observation. "I guess I am," he said. "You should smile more. You look nicer when you smile." Frank felt his cheeks grow warm. "Thanks, Emma." They returned to the truck as the sun was setting, painting the Kansas sky in shades of orange and purple. Emma watched through the windshield, her small face illuminated by the fading light. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Yeah," Frank agreed. "It is." They drove into the night, Emma eventually falling asleep in the passenger seat, her head lolling against the window. Frank drove on, the familiar rhythm of the highway soothing something inside him. But this time, the solitude did not feel like isolation. It felt like peace. He thought about the path that had led him here, the grief and guilt and years of running. He thought about Sarah and Lily, about the life they had shared and the life that had been stolen from them. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his loss without trying to escape it. It hurt. God, it hurt, but beneath the pain, there was something else. Something that felt almost like hope. He looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully beside him, and felt a connection he had not expected. This little girl had lost her mother, had been abandoned and alone, and yet she still trusted, still hoped, still believed that good things were possible. Maybe, Frank thought, there was a lesson in that. They arrived in Omaha just as the sun was rising, the city emerging from the morning mist like a promise. Frank navigated through the streets, following the directions to Nancy's house, a modest split level in a quiet neighborhood. Nancy was waiting on the porch when they pulled up, her face a mixture of relief and concern. She had aged in the months since Frank had last seen her, new lines around her eyes and gray threaded through her brown hair, but her smile was the same, warm and welcoming. Frank climbed down from the truck and helped Emma out, her small hand clutching his as they walked toward the house. Nancy came down the steps to meet them, crouching to Emma's level. "You must be Emma," she said. "I'm Nancy." I'm really glad you're here. Emma studied her with the serious expression Frank had come to recognize. Are you Frank's sister? I am. He said you have a big heart. Nancy looked up at Frank, surprise and emotion flickering across her face. Did he now? Frank felt his cheeks grow warm again. Come on, he said gruffly. Let's get inside. Nancy's house was warm and welcoming, full of comfortable furniture and photographs. Emma looked around with wide eyes, taking in the evidence of a life that was stable and safe. Are you hungry? Nancy asked. I made pancakes. Emma nodded shyly, and Nancy led her to the kitchen while Frank followed behind. They ate breakfast together, the conversation light and easy, Emma gradually relaxing in Nancy's presence. Afterward, Nancy showed Emma the guest room, which she had decorated with stuffed animals and colorful blankets. Emma's face lit up as she explored, touching everything with careful wonder. This is for me, she asked. For as long as you need it, Nancy said. Emma turned to Frank, her eyes shining. Can I stay here? Frank looked at Nancy, who nodded almost imperceptibly. You can stay here, he said. Nancy will take care of you while we figure things out. But you'll come visit, right? Emma's voice trembled slightly. You promised you wouldn't leave. Frank felt the weight of that promise settling onto his shoulders. He had made it impulsively in a moment of crisis without thinking about what it would mean. But looking at Emma's hopeful face, he knew he could not break it. I'll come visit, he said, as often as I can. Emma threw her arms around him, hugging him with the same fierce intensity she had shown at the truck stop. Thank you, Frank. Thank you for everything. Frank hugged her back, feeling something break loose inside him. Tears he had not cried in years suddenly burned behind his eyes. You're welcome, Emma, he managed. You're welcome. He stayed for 2 days, helping Emma settle in, spending time with Nancy for the first time in years. They talked about Sarah and Lily, about the accident and the grief, about the years Frank had spent running. You couldn't have saved them, Nancy said on the second night, after Emma had gone to bed. You know that, right? Even if you had been there was nothing you could have done. Frank stared at his hands, the same hands that had held his daughter, that had touched his wife's face, that had been 500 miles away when they needed him most. Knowing that doesn't make it easier, he said. No, Nancy agreed, but maybe it's time to stop punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. Frank did not respond, but her words stayed with him as he got back on the road the next morning. Emma stood on the porch with Nancy, waving goodbye until the truck was out of sight. The highway stretched before him, familiar and endless. But something was different now. The cab did not feel as empty as it once had. The miles did not feel as meaningless. He thought about Emma, about her trust and her hope and her refusal to give up. He thought about Nancy, about her patience and her love, and her willingness to take in a stranger's child. He thought about Sarah and Lily, about the family he had lost, and the grief that still lived inside him. And for the first time in 3 years, he did not try to run from any of it. 3 months passed. Frank drove his routes, but he always found time to stop in Omaha, sometimes for a few hours, sometimes for a few days. Emma thrived under Nancy's care, attending school, making friends, slowly healing from the trauma of abandonment. Each time Frank visited, she greeted him with the same enthusiasm, dragging him into her room to show him her drawings, her schoolwork, the garden she was helping Nancy plant. And each time, Frank felt himself softening, opening, becoming more like the man he used to be. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emma turned to him with a serious expression. "Frank," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Sure, sweetheart. Do you think my mommy will ever come back?" Frank considered the question carefully. Nancy had been working with social services to establish legal guardianship, a process complicated by the mother's disappearance. There had been no contact since that single text message, no indication that she even remembered the daughter she had left behind. "I don't know," Frank said honestly, "but I know that wherever she is, she loves you. And I know that you have people here who love you too." "Like you?" Frank felt his heart crack open a little more. "Like me," he said. Emma leaned against him, her small body warm and trusting. "I'm glad you found me," she said. "Me too," Frank said. "Me too." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Frank watched it, really watched it for the first time in years, and felt something he had forgotten was possible: peace. A year later, Nancy's adoption of Emma was finalized. Frank was there for the celebration, watching as Emma ran around the living room in her new dress, showing off the certificate that made everything official. "I have a real family now," she announced to everyone who would listen. "I have Aunt Nancy, and I have Frank, and I have a house and a room and everything." Frank sat in the corner, watching her with a smile he no longer tried to suppress. His face had relearned how to make that expression, thanks largely to the little girl who had refused to let him hide. Nancy came to sit beside him, a glass of punch in her hand. "You know," she said, "you're part of this family too, officially or not." Frank nodded slowly. "I know. She's changed you," Nancy observed. "Emma, I haven't seen you smile this much since before." Frank thought about that. "She didn't change me," he said finally. "She just reminded me who I used to be." "Same thing, isn't it?" Frank considered the question. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe it is." That night, after the guests had gone and Emma had been put to bed, Frank sat on the porch alone. The stars were bright overhead, the same stars that had shone down on him during countless lonely nights on the road. But he was not lonely anymore. He had Nancy and Emma. He had a reason to come home. He had, against all odds, found his way back to life. He thought about that morning in the truck stop, about the crying he had heard from across the parking lot. He could have ignored it. He could have walked the other way, gotten in his truck, continued his endless flight from grief. But he had stopped. He had listened. He had opened himself to another person's pain. And that single choice had changed everything. Frank pulled out his phone and looked at the lock screen, a photograph Nancy had taken at the adoption celebration. Emma was sitting on his lap, her arms around his neck, both of them laughing at something just out of frame. He was smiling in the picture, really smiling, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face, the kind of smile he had thought was gone forever. A 5-year-old girl had done something unexpected. She had looked at a broken man and seen someone worth trusting. She had reached out her small hand and pulled him back from the edge, and in doing so, she had saved his life. Frank looked up at the stars, feeling tears roll down his cheeks. But these were not tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude, of wonder, of a love he had thought himself incapable of feeling. "Thank you," he whispered to the night sky. "Thank you for not letting me walk away." The stars twinkled in response, ancient and constant, witnesses to every journey and every transformation. And somewhere in the house behind him, a little girl slept peacefully, dreaming of the family she had found. 5 years later, Frank Morrison pulled his Peterbilt into the parking lot of a familiar truck stop in Lyman, Colorado. The building had been renovated since he was last here. The parking lot expanded, but the bones were the same. He climbed down from the cab, his joints protesting less than they used to. At 63, he had finally scaled back his routes, taking only the runs that allowed him to be home every few days. Home, which was now a small house in Omaha, just down the street from Nancy and Emma. Emma. She was 10 now, a 5th grader with strong opinions and a fierce determination to help others. She volunteered at the local animal shelter, organized food drives at her school, and had recently announced her intention to become a social worker when she grew up. "So I can help kids like me," she had explained, "kids who need someone to find them." Frank smiled at the memory as he walked toward the truck stop entrance. Emma was at school today, but she had made him promise to take a picture when he reached this place. "This is where our story started," she had said. "I want to see it." He had tried to explain that it was just a truck stop, nothing special about it. But Emma had insisted, and Frank had learned long ago that arguing with her was pointless. Inside, the truck stop was busy with the late morning rush. Frank ordered coffee and found a seat by the window, looking out at the parking lot where he had found a crying 5-year-old girl all those years ago. The memory was vivid, unchanged by time, the fear in her eyes, the way she had clutched that photograph of her grandmother, the simple question that had broken through his defenses. Will you stay? He had stayed. Not just that day, but every day since. He had watched Emma grow and change and become the remarkable person she was always meant to be. He had allowed himself to be changed in return, to open his heart again, to love again. It had not been easy. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, days when the grief came rushing back with all its original force. But he had not run from it. He had learned to carry it with him, to let it coexist with the joy and love that had re-entered his life. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Did you get there yet? Did you take the picture?" Frank smiled and typed back, "Just got here. Having coffee first." The response came immediately. "Hurry up, old man, I want to see it." Frank laughed, an easy sound that came naturally now. He had laughed more in the past 5 years than in the previous 20. Emma had that effect on people. He finished his coffee and walked outside, pulling out his phone to take the picture Emma had requested. He framed the shot to include the parking lot, the trucks lined up in their rows, the spot where he had found her. But before he could take the picture, he heard something that stopped him cold. A child crying, coming from somewhere behind the trucks. Frank stood frozen, his heart pounding. It was probably nothing. A kid having a tantrum, a family argument, something mundane and ordinary. But he could not walk away. Not after everything, not knowing what he knew. He followed the sound, weaving between parked trucks until he found its source. A boy, maybe 7 or 8, huddled against the wheel of a trailer. His clothes were dirty and too big for him, his face streaked with tears. Frank crouched down, bringing himself to the child's level. "Hey there," he said softly. "Are you okay?" The boy looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm lost," he said. "I can't find my dad." Frank felt the echo of another morning, another lost child, another moment that could change everything. "My name's Frank," he said. "Let's go inside and see if we can find your dad together, okay?" The boy hesitated, then nodded and took Frank's outstretched hand. As they walked toward the truck stop, Frank thought about the strange circles life could trace. 5 years ago, he had been the one who needed saving, and a 5-year-old girl had done something unexpected. Now, here he was, reaching out to another lost child, continuing the chain of connection that Emma had started. He found the boy's father within minutes, a frantic man who had been searching the parking lot in a panic. The reunion was tearful and grateful, the father shaking Frank's hand over and over again. "Thank you," he kept saying. "Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done." Frank waved off the thanks, uncomfortable with the attention. "Just glad I could help," he said. He returned to his truck and finally took the picture for Emma, sending it with a caption, "Our spot, and you'll never guess what just happened." The phone rang almost immediately. Emma's voice came through, breathless with curiosity. "What? What happened?" Frank told her about the lost boy, about finding him and reuniting him with his father. Emma was quiet for a long moment when he finished. "You did it again," she said finally. "You stopped and helped." "I learned from the best," Frank replied. Emma laughed, a sound that still had the power to fill his heart with warmth. "I love you, Frank," she said. "I love you too, sweetheart." He hung up and sat in his truck for a moment, looking out at the parking lot. The sun was high overhead, casting sharp shadows across the pavement. Trucks came and went, travelers continued their journeys, the endless movement of life flowing around him. But Frank did not feel like he was watching from the outside anymore. He was part of it, connected to something larger than himself. He had been found, just as surely as Emma had been found, pulled back from the brink by a tiny hand and an impossible trust. No one could make this tough trucker smile again. That was what they used to say about him, Stone-Face Morrison, the ghost of the highways, the man who had forgotten how to feel. But a 5-year-old girl had done something unexpected. She had looked at him with her enormous brown eyes and seen past the walls he had built. She had reached out and touched something that was still alive beneath all that stone, and slowly, carefully, she had taught him how to smile again. Frank started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, heading home. The road stretched before him, familiar and full of possibility. He was smiling the whole way. 2 weeks after his visit to the truck stop in Lyman, Frank sat in the audience of Lincoln Elementary School, watching Emma receive an award for community service. She stood on the stage in her best dress, her hair neatly braided by Nancy, her face glowing with pride as the principal handed her a plaque and shook her hand. Emma Rose Patterson, the principal announced into the microphone, has demonstrated an extraordinary commitment to helping others. She has organized 3 food drives this year alone, volunteered over 200 hours at the animal shelter, and started a buddy program to help new students feel welcome at our school. Emma embodies the spirit of compassion and community that we strive to cultivate in all our students. The audience applauded, and Frank felt his eyes grow wet. He clapped harder than anyone, not caring who saw the tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Afterward, Emma found him in the crowd and threw herself into his arms. "Did you see?" she asked excitedly. "Did you see my plaque?" "I saw," Frank said, hugging her tight. "I'm so proud of you, Emma." She pulled back and looked at him with those serious brown eyes that had not changed since she was 5. "I couldn't have done any of it without you," she said. "You know that, right?" Frank shook his head. "This is all you, sweetheart. You're the one who decided to help people. You showed me how," Emma finished. "You showed me that one person can make a difference, that stopping to help someone can change everything." Frank did not have words for what he felt in that moment. Pride, yes. Love, certainly. But also something else, something harder to name. A sense of completion, perhaps, of a circle closing. "Come on," Nancy said, appearing beside them with her camera. "Let me get a picture of you two." Frank and Emma posed together, Emma holding her plaque, Frank with his arm around her shoulders. Nancy snapped several photos, then showed them the results on the camera's screen. Frank looked at the image of himself, at the smile on his face, at the way his eyes crinkled with genuine happiness. He barely recognized himself. The man in the photograph looked nothing like Stoneface Morrison, the ghost who had haunted the highways for 3 years after losing everything. That man was gone, buried somewhere on a road in Colorado. In his place stood someone new, someone who had been rebuilt piece by piece by a 5-year-old girl with tangled hair and enormous eyes. "Let's go celebrate," Nancy said. "Emma gets to pick the restaurant." "Pizza," Emma announced immediately. Frank laughed. Of course, pizza. They went to Emma's favorite pizza place, a noisy establishment with arcade games and all-you-can-eat breadsticks. Frank usually avoided places like this, preferring quiet truck stops and diners where he could be alone with his thoughts. But Emma loved it, and Frank had learned that there was very little he would not do to make her happy. As they waited for their food, Emma peppered Frank with questions about his recent runs. Where had he gone? What had he seen? Had he met any interesting people? "I drove through Wyoming last week," Frank told her. "Stopped at this little diner in Cheyenne where they make the best apple pie I've ever tasted." "Better than Aunt Nancy's?" Emma asked, grinning at her aunt. Nancy pretended to be offended. "Watch yourself, Frank Morrison." Frank held up his hands in surrender. "I said nothing. I plead the fifth." Emma giggled and Frank felt warmth spread through his chest. This was what he'd been missing all those years on the road. Not just a destination, but a reason to come home. Not just people to love, but people who loved him back. The pizza arrived, and they dug in with enthusiasm. Emma ate 3 slices, then excused herself to play in the arcade with some friends from school. Frank watched her go, marveling at how comfortable she had become in her own skin. "She's doing really well," Nancy said, following his gaze. "Her therapist says she's made incredible progress." "She's a strong kid," Frank agreed. "She had a good example." Nancy looked at him pointedly. "You, Frank. I'm talking about you." Frank shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't do anything special." "You stopped," Nancy said simply. You could have walked away that day. Any other person would have, but you stopped and you listened and you stayed. That's not nothing, Frank. That's everything. Frank thought about the morning in the truck stop, about the moment he had heard Emma crying. He had almost walked away. He had stood there, caught between his instinct to mind his own business and something deeper that demanded he act. He was glad he had listened to the deeper voice. "Can I ask you something?" he said to Nancy. "Of course. Do you think Sarah would be proud of me?" Nancy was quiet for a long moment, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She adored you, Frank," she said finally. "Even when you were pushing everyone away, even when you disappeared into your grief, she never stopped loving you. And if she could see you now, see what you've become, who you are to Emma, yes, she would be incredibly proud." Frank felt the familiar ache of grief, but it was softer now, worn smooth by time and love. He thought about Sarah, about her laugh and her kindness, and the way she had always believed in him, even when he did not believe in himself. "I miss her," he said, "every day." "I know." Nancy reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "But she wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life missing her. She would want you to live, to love, to find joy again. And that's exactly what you've done." Emma returned from the arcade, flushed with excitement from some game she had won. Frank smiled at her, and this time he did not try to suppress it. He let the smile spread across his face, let it reach his eyes, let it transform him into the person he was slowly becoming. "Ready to go home?" Nancy asked. Emma nodded, then turned to Frank. "Will you read me a story tonight?" Frank looked at his watch. He had planned to hit the road tonight, get a head start on his next run, but the schedule could wait, the freight could wait. Some things were more important. "Yeah," he said, "I'll read you a story." Emma's face lit up. "Can you do the voices?" Frank pretended to consider. "I suppose I could do the voices." "Yes!" Emma pumped her fist in the air. They drove back to Nancy's house, the familiar streets of Omaha passing by outside the windows. Frank thought about all the roads he had traveled, all the miles he had driven, all the years he had spent running from his pain. The road was still out there, waiting for him. It always would be, but it was not his escape anymore. It was just his job, a way to make a living and see the country and have time to think. His real life was here, in this car, with these people. Emma fell asleep during the drive, her head drooping against the window. Frank watched her in the rearview mirror, remembering another little girl who had fallen asleep in cars, who had trusted him completely, who had been taken from him before he could say goodbye. But Emma was still here. Emma was safe and loved, and growing into a remarkable young person. And Frank had been given the gift of watching it happen, of being part of her story, of having her be part of his. When they got home, Frank carried Emma inside and tucked her into bed. She stirred as he pulled the covers up to her chin. "The story," she murmured. "You promised." Frank smiled and reached for the book on her nightstand. It was a well-worn copy of Charlotte's Web, Emma's favorite. He opened to the bookmarked page and began to read, giving each character a distinct voice, the way Emma liked. By the time he reached the end of the chapter, Emma was fast asleep, her breathing deep and even. Frank closed the book and sat for a moment, watching her sleep. "Good night, sweetheart," he whispered. "I love you." He bent down and kissed her forehead, then quietly left the room. Nancy was waiting in the hallway, a cup of tea in her hands. "She's out?" "Like a light," Frank confirmed. They walked to the living room and sat down, the house quiet around them. Frank thought about the text message he had received 5 years ago, the one that had seemed to end Emma's chance at a normal life. "I'm sorry. I can't come back. Please take care of Emma." They had never heard from Emma's mother again. The police had searched, social services had investigated, but she had simply vanished. Frank used to feel angry about that, used to hate the woman who had abandoned her child in a parking lot. But the anger had faded over time, replaced by something more like pity. Whatever demons that woman was fighting, she had loved her daughter. Frank believed that. She just had not been strong enough to fight for her. You're thinking about her mother, Nancy said, reading his expression. Frank nodded. Sometimes I wonder what happened to her. Me too, Nancy sighed. But wherever she is, I hope she knows that Emma is okay, that she's more than okay, that she's thriving. Frank thought about that. Maybe someday Emma would want to find her biological mother. Maybe she would have questions that only that woman could answer. But for now, she was happy and secure, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. I should get some sleep, Frank said, standing up. Early start tomorrow. Nancy stood too and pulled him into a hug. Thank you, Frank, she said, for everything. Frank hugged her back. Thank you, he replied, for not giving up on me. He went to the guest room that had become his room, the place where he stayed whenever he was in Omaha. The walls were decorated with photographs now, images of Emma and Nancy and himself, a visual history of the family they had become. Frank changed into his pajamas and climbed into bed, feeling the familiar mattress settle beneath his weight. He was tired, the kind of healthy tiredness that came from a full day, not the bone-deep exhaustion of years spent running from grief. He closed his eyes and let sleep take him. In his dreams, Sarah was there. She was smiling at him, the way she used to smile when he came home from a long haul. She was holding Lily's hand, and both of them looked happy, at peace. I'm proud of you, Sarah said. You found your way back. Frank tried to speak, but no words came out. Sarah just smiled and nodded, understanding anyway. Take care of her, she said. Take care of both of them. I will, Frank managed. I promise. Sarah's smile widened, and then she was gone, fading into the light of the dream. But the warmth of her presence remained, wrapping around Frank like a blanket. He woke the next morning, feeling something he had not felt in years. Hope. Pure, uncomplicated hope for the future. The sun was streaming through the windows when he came downstairs to find Emma already up, helping Nancy make breakfast. She was standing on a step stool at the counter, carefully cracking eggs into a bowl. Look, Frank, she called out when she saw him. I'm making scrambled eggs. You sure are, Frank said, walking over to inspect her work. Those look perfect. Emma beamed with pride. Aunt Nancy says I'm a natural. You are, Nancy confirmed, ruffling Emma's hair. A natural mess maker, that is. Hey, Emma protested, but she was laughing. They ate breakfast together, the morning light filling the kitchen with warmth. Frank drank his coffee and watched Emma and Nancy joke around, feeling a contentment that still surprised him sometimes. When breakfast was done, Emma walked him out to his truck. She always did this, ever since the first time he had left. It was her ritual, her way of saying goodbye without really saying it. How long will you be gone this time, she asked. About a week. Maybe a little longer. Emma nodded seriously. Be safe, okay? Don't drive too fast. Frank smiled. I won't. And call me every night, I will. And bring me something cool from wherever you go. Frank laughed. I'll see what I can find. Emma threw her arms around him, hugging him tight. I love you, Frank. I love you too, sweetheart. He climbed into the cab and started the engine, watching Emma in the side mirror as he pulled away. She stood on the sidewalk, waving, until he turned the corner, and she was out of sight. The road stretched before him, familiar and endless. But it was not a road to nowhere anymore. It was a road that led home. Frank Morrison drove into the morning, smiling. 6 months later, Frank retired from trucking. It was a decision that had been building for a while, a recognition that his body was not as young as it used to be, and that there were things he wanted to do that did not involve being on the road for days at a time. The company threw him a party, all the dispatchers and mechanics and fellow drivers coming together to celebrate his 34 years of service. They gave him a plaque and a watch, and a lot of handshakes and backslaps. But the real celebration happened later, at Nancy's house, with the people who mattered most. Emma had decorated the living room with streamers and balloons, and she presented Frank with a card she had made herself. To Frank, she had written in her careful 10-year-old handwriting, "The best trucker and the best person I know. Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for staying. I love you forever and always." Emma. Frank read the card 3 times, his vision blurring with tears. He did not try to hide them. He had learned that tears were not weakness. They were just another way of saying, "I feel this deeply." "What are you going to do now?" Nancy asked as they sat down to the dinner she had prepared. "Now that you're not driving anymore?" Frank considered the question. He had thought about it a lot over the past few months. There were places he wanted to see without the pressure of a deadline. Books he wanted to read, time he wanted to spend with Emma and Nancy. But there was something else too. Something that had been growing in his mind ever since that morning at the truck stop in Limon. "I want to help," he said slowly. "Kids like Emma, people who are lost and need someone to find them." Nancy raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Frank took a deep breath. "I've been talking to some people about starting a foundation, something that would help kids in crisis situations, connect them with resources, with families who can take them in, with support systems that can help them heal." Emma's eyes went wide. "Really, really?" Frank smiled at her. "You inspired me, Emma. What you do, helping other kids at school, volunteering at the shelter, I want to do something like that too, on a bigger scale." Nancy set down her fork, her expression thoughtful. "That's a big undertaking, Frank, I know, but I've got time now, and I've got some money saved up, and I've got you too." Frank looked at Emma, then at Nancy. "What do you think?" Emma answered first, as she usually did. "I think it's the best idea ever," she said. "Can I help?" Frank laughed. "I was counting on it." Nancy smiled and reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I think Sarah would love this," she said softly. Frank felt the familiar warmth that came whenever someone mentioned his late wife. "Yeah," he said, "I think she would." They spent the rest of the evening talking about the foundation, brainstorming names and ideas and ways to make it work. Emma contributed enthusiastically, her young mind full of creative suggestions that Frank dutifully wrote down. By the time they finished, they had the beginnings of a plan. A way to take the pain of Frank's past and transform it into something beautiful. The Frank Morrison Foundation for Children in Crisis launched 6 months later, funded by Frank's savings and donations from truckers and trucking companies across the country. The word had spread through the CB network, through truck stops and rest areas, through the community that Frank had been part of for 3 decades. "Stoneface Morrison is starting a charity for lost kids," they said. "The guy who never smiled, the guy who drove like a ghost for 3 years. He found a little girl in a truck stop, and now he wants to help other kids like her." Donations poured in, more than Frank had ever expected. Messages of support came from truckers he had never met, from families who had lost children, from people who understood what it meant to be broken and put back together. Emma was there for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, standing beside Frank as he cut the red ribbon stretched across the door of the foundation's office. She held his hand the way she had held it that first day in the truck stop, her grip strong and sure. "We did it," she whispered. "We did it," Frank agreed. The foundation grew quickly, connecting lost and abandoned children with families who could help, providing resources for kids in crisis, training truck drivers to recognize and respond to situations involving children in need. Frank threw himself into the work, spending his retirement not in idleness but in purpose. He traveled to truck stops and rest areas, giving talks about what to look for, how to approach a child in distress, when to call for help, and when to simply be present. And everywhere he went, he told Emma's story. The 5-year-old girl who had done something unexpected, who had looked at a broken man and seen someone worth saving, who had reached out her small hand and changed everything. He was smiling in every photograph. 10 years after that morning in Limon, Frank Morrison sat on the porch of his house in Omaha, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. He was 73 now, his hair completely grey, his hands spotted with age. But his eyes were clear and his heart was full. Emma was 20 now, a junior at the University of Nebraska studying social work. She came home every weekend to help with the foundation, which had grown beyond anything Frank had imagined. They had helped thousands of children over the years, connected hundreds of families, trained tens of thousands of truckers to be first responders in crisis situations. The door opened behind him, and Emma stepped onto the porch. She was a woman now, beautiful and confident, with the same brown eyes that had looked up at him from behind a row of trucks all those years ago. "Hey," she said, sitting down beside him. "Nancy says dinner's almost ready." "I'll be there in a minute," Frank said. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky deepen from orange to purple to the first hints of night. "I got accepted," Emma said suddenly. Frank turned to look at her. "Accepted? To the graduate program, for my master's in social work." Emma's face was glowing with pride. "They said I was exactly the kind of person they were looking for. Someone with lived experience who understands what these kids are going through." Frank felt his heart swell with pride and love. "Emma, that's wonderful. I couldn't have done it without you." Emma took his hand, her grip warm and strong. "Any of it. You know that, right?" Frank shook his head. "You did all the hard work. I just stopped," Emma finished. "You stopped that day when no one else did. You listened when I needed someone to hear me. You stayed when everyone else left. Frank, you saved my life. You saved mine, too," Frank said quietly. They sat together as the stars came out. Two people whose lives had intersected in the most unlikely of ways and had been transformed by that intersection. Frank thought about all the years that had passed, all the pain and all the joy, all the grief and all the healing. He thought about Sarah and Lily, gone but not forgotten, their memory a quiet presence in everything he did. He thought about Nancy, who had opened her heart and her home without hesitation. He thought about the thousands of children the foundation had helped, each one a reminder that one moment of compassion could change everything. And he thought about Emma, the scared 5-year-old who had become a remarkable young woman, the lost child who had found her way home, the unexpected gift who had taught him how to smile again. "I love you, Emma," he said. "I love you too, Frank." Emma squeezed his hand, forever and always. The night settled over Omaha, soft and peaceful. Somewhere in the distance, a truck rumbled down the highway, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Frank smiled and watched the stars come out. Feeling something he had once thought impossible, complete and utter peace, the foundation continued to grow. The years continued to pass. Emma graduated and became a social worker, dedicating her life to helping children in crisis. Nancy grew older gracefully, always there with a warm meal and a listening ear. And Frank, the tough trucker who no one could make smile, spent his final years surrounded by love. When he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 85, the trucking community mourned. They gathered at his funeral by the hundreds, men and women who had known him, who had been trained by his foundation, who had been inspired by his story. Emma spoke at the service, her voice steady, even as tears streamed down her face. "Frank Morrison saved my life," she said. "But more than that, he taught me that one moment of kindness can change everything. One decision to stop, to listen, to stay. He was a tough man, yes, a man who carried grief like a weight on his shoulders, but he was also the best man I ever knew, and I am who I am because he chose to see me when I was invisible, to help me when I was lost, to love me when I needed it most." She paused, looking out at the crowd of truckers and family and friends. Frank used to say that no one could make him smile again after he lost his wife and daughter. But that wasn't true. I made him smile. A scared 5-year-old girl in a truck stop parking lot, crying for her mother. I did something unexpected. I trusted him, and that trust changed both of our lives. Emma smiled through her tears. "So if you take anything from Frank's story," she said, "let it be this. Don't walk away from someone who needs you. Stop, listen, stay. You never know whose life you might save, and you never know how saving them might save you." The funeral ended, and the truckers returned to their roads, carrying Frank's memory with them across the country. Emma returned to her work, helping children in crisis, honoring Frank's legacy with every life she touched. And somewhere, on the endless highways of America, the story of Stoneface Morrison lived on. The tough trucker who lost everything, the ghost who haunted the roads, the man who was saved by a 5-year-old girl, the man who learned to smile again. His name was Frank Morrison, and this is how he found his way back to life. Not through running, but through stopping. Not through isolation, but through connection. Not through forgetting, but through remembering what really matters. Family, love, the courage to open your heart, and sometimes the unexpected grace of a child's trust. The highways still stretch across America, endless ribbons of asphalt connecting cities and towns and lives. Truckers still drive through the night, hauling their loads from coast to coast, stopping at the same truck stops where Frank once stopped. And sometimes, when the night is quiet and the stars are bright, they tell stories about him, about the tough trucker who never smiled, about the little girl who changed everything, about the moment when a broken man heard a child crying and made the choice that would define the rest of his life. They tell the story because it matters, because it reminds them that they are not just drivers moving freight. They are human beings, capable of extraordinary kindness, capable of saving lives, capable of being saved themselves. Stop, they tell each other. Listen, stay. You never know whose life you might change. And somewhere in every truck stop parking lot, there might be a child who needs exactly that. A child who is lost and scared and waiting for someone to find them. Someone like Frank Morrison, someone like you. The road goes on forever, but the journey home begins with a single step, a single choice, a single moment of unexpected grace. That is the lesson Frank left behind. That is his legacy. That is the truth that Emma carries with her every single day. Love finds us in the strangest places. Hope appears when we least expect it. And sometimes the person who saves us is the last person we would ever expect. A 5-year-old girl in a dirty pink dress. A tough trucker who had forgotten how to smile. 2 broken people who found each other in a parking lot and discovered that together they could be whole. This is their story. This is how it ends. With a smile.